was asked to look ahead to 2025 in terms of creating the research environment. Whatever I say, probably 50% of it will be wrong, because even though that's only 6 years away, things are changing very, very rapidly. And what we think we need now and what things might look like, or what we think they're going to look like in 2025, may be very different. I think it's been remarkable, the impact that political support for dementia has had. When you look back over the last 12 years, starting off with the Dendron Research Network, and the very fact that at a time when there was a cancer network, there was a network for pediatrics, for diabetes, that there was a decision that dementia and neurodegeneration should have a special place. And I think it was quite important to include diseases like Parkinson's disease, because dementia, as we know, is a very fluid construct. It's not a particularly useful one, except politically it's useful, and it does encompass an enormous number of different diseases with a lot of individuality, but also with a lot of commonality. And it was really with the Prime Minister's challenge that things took off, and when perhaps political support might have been waning with other things high on the agenda, I think it was very important that the WHO decided that dementia needed a global action plan. So that's been another very important driver. And just at the end of last year, a review of that 2020 government challenge has taken place, and at the moment there is a process to look at what might be the challenges for 2025. What has happened is there's been a significant increase in funding. Now, that might tail off, I recognize that, but it's not only funding that's needed with research. A lot of the other things are quite cultural and a bit more fuzzy, and I put some of them up here because what we want is new and young researchers. There's not much point in asking me to solve some new science, because I won't be able to. We need new, young people. I think it's very important that we do think about what we mean by informed choice for research. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And we need very robust public and patient involvement. And this isn't not just, we need a few people to advise about feasibility, etc. I do think it's critically important, clearly for patients, to help decide what are the key issues and questions. But if the public don't think this is an important issue, it's going to be very, very difficult to drive it. So just taking some of those issues, all I'm going to talk about are some of the environment, the research infrastructure, not particular areas of research, that's out there at the moment and where I think it might be going. Well, I talked about getting in new and young researchers. One of the biggest investments has been from the Medical Research Council and the charities to create a UK Dementia Research Institute. That, at the beginning, and still primarily, has been to plug the gap in basic molecular science in this area. We're very good on molecular science in cancer, less so in the areas of neurodegeneration. But in addition, has been specifically identified funding for a technology care component, and that's been very much driven by the Alzheimer's Society. Here is just some indication of how far we are behind in terms of output. So number of publications on PubMed for dementia there compared with cancer. We've got to bring people into the field, and we've got to bring people in from the field from elsewhere. There's a lot of people who are working in areas that are relevant to dementia, and they may not realize it, and we may have to help people realize it. And the other thing is we have to bring people in from abroad. We are not an island, certainly not in terms of research, and we have to be very open in bringing in foreign expertise for research. One of the other things that we've done in NIHR is to create a website for young researchers, which is slightly different from a website that talks about research. This is, if you're young, what are the things that you would have liked to know? What are the things you never quite dared to ask? Well, I would have known how you get on with a really difficult supervisor. So we actually have a blog and an interview in how you deal with supervisors who are not really engaging with you. How do you actually do a PhD while you're bringing up a young family? A lot of things that actually make it very difficult to go into research when you're young. That's the place to go, and if you just Google dementia researcher, that's what you'll find. Research isn't going to go very far if we don't do two things. One is to share data, and I won't be talking about that further, but there's a whole political agenda around not only open publication, that's in a sense relatively easy to solve, but it's access to the data that underpins publications and research. But the other is to play nicely and to share, and one very important initiative, again from the Medical Research Council, has been the Dementias Platform UK, which recognised that the UK is, it's not unique, but it is very, very strong in cohorts. Much of that is because of the nature of our health service, but we've also had the insight to set up a number of birth cohorts. And some of these go back, the particular one that we're involved with at UCL goes back to people born in a week in March in 1946. A lot of these people are now at the age they're beginning to develop Alzheimer's and other dementing illnesses. These are very, very powerful cohorts. And if you add together the cohorts that are funded, you have approximately 2 million people. By sharing the data from those cohorts is very powerful for dementia research. But you can't just have a cohort. If you want to use these cohorts for what is suggested, an important source for highly stratified patients to explore targeted molecular interventions, then you need somewhere to actually do the research. And there is now a translational research collaboration which provides the clinical research facilities that are needed particularly for early phase studies, things that will require high input and stratification that again now work together. So it comes back to that theme of needing to work together. And looking to 2025, that I think is a sine qua non of how the research environment will look. But the other great advantage of our National Health Service is, of course, that it does, by and large, support collaboration between trusts, between doctors. And we can embed research into the NHS, and that is a particular part of the NHS vision. I mentioned right at the beginning that in going right back to 2006, Dendron, the Dementia and Neurodegenerative Diseases Network, was set up, and that is still running as a subcomponent of the Clinical Research Network. What this essentially means are people who are embedded within the NHS who are able to support the delivery of studies. It's the supporting of the delivery of studies is not funding those studies per se. If somebody has funding, for example, from the Medical Research Council or the Wellcome or NIHR, this is where you can prosecute that research within the NHS. Interestingly, we have seen quite an increase both in the number of studies and in the number of people recruited. The numbers may be tailing off a little bit. It's possible that this reflects as much the nature of research that's being done, which still tends to be dominated by Alzheimer's disease, which is looking for smaller numbers of highly stratified individuals. But it's not all about clinical trials, molecular biology, etc. There's also the importance of care research, and that's always been politically quite difficult because obviously things are changing now, but the separation of social care from health care has not helped, and the way that care homes are funded and structured. But there is now ENRICH, which stands for Enabling Research in Care Homes, a network of care homes who have signed up to supporting research in which the care research agenda can be supported, and there has been increased focus on funding research in this area. The other one I wanted to talk about, because I think it illustrates a number of quite important principles, and I would hope is a model for the future, is something called Joint Dementia Research, which we set up as a little bit like a marriage agency. So a researcher wants to access patients, patients want to engage in research, and the studies and the evidence suggests that that's very important. But it's very difficult for people to know how to enter into research. And essentially what this does is people register their interest, and that's both people with a diagnosis, but people who may be carers, or the public who just have an interest. And of course we need a lot of people, the way the research is going, who are middle-aged and on, who may be otherwise healthy and well. And of course we need young people who have experience of a grandparent or a parent. A lot of people who may only be teenagers who are the carers for young onset dementias. The researcher puts on the information about the research that they're doing and the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then in real time it gets matched. So if I'm a registrant, which I am, I see that there's about 6 studies that I can enter, and I tick on the ones I might be interested in. And of course that's what joint dementia research can provide, which is real-time matching. So if I get asked about a study, I can say, okay, hang on a minute, I'll just go and check on joint dementia research, and I can actually see that there's a few other studies here which are much more, much prefer to be in those. The second key principle is that researchers should have access to all patients who want to engage. That doesn't mean to say that they contact them because they have consent in the register to email them or phone them. Doesn't commit anybody to doing anything, but doctors and researchers do not own patients. And at a recent workshop, we were able to get these 2, what I think are fundamental principles agreed, and I do think that's for the future. But the other one is developing the community, and it comes back to this public and patient involvement. It can only happen if there's a genuine partnership. One needs champions, one needs citizen science and citizen scientists. I think they're slightly different. There's people who will engage in citizen science in that they will come up with a lot of analyses to be done, and there's citizen science, which happens at the moment, where a lot of people will collect the data. That happens in many trials where a carer will provide data. And then there's around issues of feasibility, new ideas, etc., and the importance of knowledge transfer. So looking to 2025, I think there's a number of things there that will need to be pursued, but 6 years' time, it'll look very different, whatever I say. I'll stop there.